Hello, I'm Rose English and this is Rose's news, reviews and interviews. Today I'm doing a book review and it's all about the book called Blinded by the Light by Kipling. So, the story is set in the UK in the near future. The Sandman virus has greatly diminished the population, and the population is now very much divided, almost into a kind of us and them scenario. The country has been split into 3 select neighbourhood projects. There's London, Edinburgh and Manchester. All these are run by the Light Foundation. Living in these select neighbourhoods are the rich and social elite, the alphas and higher orders. Anything other than the neighbourhood is classed as over the boundary and is called simply the outside. This is the place where the echoes live. These are the diseased and underprivileged, scavengers who forage for themselves a very meagre living. Many of these lowlives, or ferals as the neighbourhood people call them, band together to form the Union. This story is aimed at teens or young adults. The story follows the life of a 15-year-old girl, an alpha, a spoiled little rich girl whose life couldn't be easier. She has everything she wants until a disaster strikes and her world is ripped open and exposed. Being cossetted within the privileged neighbourhood, there is also a naivety surrounding her, a naivety that she must overcome in order to survive. So the characters in this book. The main character is of course the 15-year-old girl called MaryAnn Hunter. She is the spoiled little rich girl, born to alpha parents whom she still refers to as Daddy and Mummy. MaryAnn's father is a politician, the legislator, and although the family are rich, they are of political background and not of celebrity status. So MaryAnn strives to fit in with the social elite, who are the celebrities of the neighbourhood. To do this, she wants to get herself a boyfriend. And who does she go after but the best, most popular boy in the school, a boy called Reese. His mum is a model and his dad is a famous singer. He's not a very nice boy. He's often out drinking beer with his mates and getting into mischief. Just think they're a cut above the rest. The man who rules over the neighbourhood is the director. Now the director is also the leader of the foundation, the leader of the Light Foundation. MaryAnn knows him because of her father's status, because the rich are always attending top social gatherings on a very regular basis. This is important to them because it gives them a chance to flaunt all their wealth and status. So MaryAnn cannot help but get to know the very rich and powerful. It's only after a major disaster occurs that MaryAnn finds herself living in the home of the director. Here's a little description of the man taken from the book. The director was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his face rugged and worn, but attractive in a way that screamed of good health and fitness. Now there's something that MaryAnn cannot comprehend. There's something about the director that she can't quite put her finger on. And when he comes to collect her from the hospital after the disaster, when he's going to pick her up and take her to live with him at his home, this is what she has to say about him. He bent and startled me by suddenly grasping my hands in his as he stared intently into my eyes. Momentarily I was astonished at how forward he was. It was unusual for anyone but exceptionally close friends and family to engage in such intimate contact. Once I'd gotten over the initial shock, I was repulsed to find that even through the material of our gloves, his hands felt cold and slimy. I cringed away from him slightly. She describes there about wearing gloves. That's something that's very common amongst the neighbourhood. Everybody wears gloves. They're so fine that they're hardly noticeable, but they're worn to prevent the spread of disease. The director lives with his daughter Maud. Now Maud's a very pale and sickly looking girl, and she seems to be afraid of her own shadow. But she seems very kind and wants to help MaryAnn settle in. She welcomes her to their home and helps her settle in and becomes her friend. After this, another character who is very much shrouded in mystery is MaryAnn's older brother Darryl. Her parents never talk about him, and when the subject or his name's ever mentioned, the subject's always changed and she's told to hush up. MaryAnn knows little about his leaving. He left when she was just 11 years old, but there are rumours that he's gone to live in the outside with the Ferrells. As the story progresses, MaryAnn's beliefs are challenged, and she's very surprised to be introduced to her Uncle Patrick. Uncle Patrick is her father's brother. He's very important amongst the Unionists, and he has very strong influence and helps MaryAnn to see the true nature of the Light Foundation. But during this time, she's also growing in strength herself and becoming aware of her own growing principles, her own thoughts and her own feelings. Finally, my favourite character of all, Peter Mallory. I found him the most likeable character in the book, someone with whom I could very easily associate. He's very sincere and caring, most helpful and very level-headed, even after all he's endured, and he's endured some real hardships. He's very caring, and he's got a pet dog he calls Flash Gordon. You cannot help but warm to him. He's in contrast to MaryAnn. Peter is so different from MaryAnn. She's very, very often rude and very arrogant. She's a typical spoilt brat, and for me she was very difficult to like. This is what made it hard for me to get into the book in the beginning, all these spoilt rich kids. So in conclusion, like I said, it did take me a long time to get into this book, but other reviews had been very favourable, so I persevered. As I got deeper into the story, beyond the spoilt rich kids and their brattish elitist ways, I began to enjoy it a lot more. I loved the mystery that surrounded it, especially when MaryAnn was given a little map that showed that there were secret panels in the library which opened to allow access to the labyrinth of tunnels below the director's house. I also liked when Peter collected MaryAnn and they travelled across the boundary into the outside. This intrigued me and hooked me in, and it was good to learn of the Unionists and how they were able to settle and build their homes in a community within a cavern system underground. What stood out for me most was the author's ability to create this story without the inclusion of excessive violence and bad language. Although there is violence, it's been incorporated in such a way as to make the reader think and imagine for themselves without it being spelt out across the pages. And I thought this was really good, brilliant. There's far too much bad language and violence in young adult books at the moment. I do recommend this book, even though I only gave it 4 stars. It was the blurb that drew me in rather than the cover of the book, and the cover of the book didn't really appeal to me, I'm afraid. The title, though, was very apt, especially with reading through the book and MaryAnn being blinded by the light. She's a self-obsessed, very privileged, rude and arrogant little rich girl who, before the disaster, has a very real naivety. Nothing else exists for her but the neighbourhood and, of course, the light. I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you do manage to pick up a copy and read it for yourself. It is worth it. It is an enjoyable read. It was just a little bit slow going for me. Thank you. I've been Rose English. Happy reading.